felt the knife tear through my flesh 18 times, my blood soaking the floor as he sat on top of me, screaming, "Today you die, Sarah!" My voice was broken, my body immobile. I couldn't scream. But 50 years later, I am here, alive, defying the fate that wanted to bury me, ready to tell how I defeated hell. Before I tell you how I survived this nightmare, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. My story can save someone. Join me in giving a voice to women silenced by violence. Your subscription says, "I see you, your struggle matters." My name is Sarah Miller, and I am 77 years old. Many people ask me how I can have such a serene expression on my face, how I can smile with such warmth after all I have lived through. And I always answer the same thing. I can be at peace because I survived hell, because I returned from the gates of death. The story I am going to tell you will not be easy to hear, but it is necessary, because perhaps it can save the life of some woman who is going through the same thing I lived. It was the year 1969 when it all began. I was 28 years old then, a mother of 2 small children, and I had just come out of a marriage that lasted 7 years. A good marriage, I must say, full of respect and affection, but one that simply came to a natural end. My ex-husband, David, was a decent, hard-working man who never laid a hand on me or disrespected me. When we separated, we did so on good terms, thinking of our children. For 4 years, I lived alone with my little ones, completely focused on working and raising them. I worked as a promoter for different companies. I was an independent, cheerful, sociable woman. I had many friends, went dancing on weekends, enjoyed my freedom. The truth is that I wasn't looking for a serious relationship. I had decided that for the moment it was better to be alone, to dedicate myself to my children and my work. It was then that I met Mark Davies through my friend, Lisa. Lisa was like a sister to me. We shared an apartment when we worked on the same promotions. Mark was one of her best friends, a 42-year-old man, a construction technician and a barber in his spare time. At first, there was no romantic interest between us. We were simply single friends who went out together to have fun. Mark was an apparently centered person, very reserved with his emotions. He never talked much about his past, only occasionally mentioning his ex-wife, always coldly, without showing any kind of feeling. He said she had been a good woman, but spoke of her as if she were a stranger. That should have alerted me, but at the time I thought he was just a man who didn't like to talk about his private life. What I did know was that Mark had grown up in a very religious family, Jehovah's Witnesses, and that for some reason he had been expelled from the congregation and rejected by his own family. According to him, this had happened because he had abandoned the religion, but he never gave me specific details. I felt very sorry for him, seeing him so alone, without the support of a family. Perhaps that was my first mistake, feeling sorry for him. For several months, we were just friends. We went out in groups, went dancing, had fun together. Mark had the same musical taste as me, liked to go to the same places. We seemed very compatible. People saw us together and said, "What a beautiful couple you make. You look so happy together." And little by little, very gradually, we began to feel attracted to each other. At first, it was just a friendship with affection. Nothing serious. Neither of us wanted to commit. But there came a time when we realized that something deeper had arisen between us, and it was Mark who proposed that we officially be boyfriend and girlfriend. I remember perfectly when we decided to make our relationship public in November 1969. I uploaded a photo of us to my social media. Although at first I wanted to put it only for my closest friends, because I had a certain intuition that my friends would not completely approve of the relationship. Mark insisted that the photo be public. "Why are you going to hide it?" he would say. "If we are together, let everyone know." So I gave in and published it for everyone. As expected, I received several messages from my friends asking if I had really gotten back with him, because apparently they had already noticed some things that I had missed. The first incident that should have alerted me happened in a nightclub. We were dancing and having a good time when a friend of mine approached to greet me. Mark immediately grabbed my arm forcefully, pulled me aside, and yelled at me in front of everyone. My friend approached me later and said, "Sarah, I didn't like the way he grabbed your arm and yelled at you. That's not right." But I was already so in love that I didn't pay attention. I even came to justify Mark's behavior, thinking it was because he loved me very much and was jealous. "It's normal for a man to get jealous when he loves," I told myself. How wrong I was. After that incident, the arguments began. At first, it was just words, but they always ended with me apologizing, even though I hadn't really done anything wrong. Mark had a very subtle way of making me feel guilty about everything. It was always me who was wrong, who had caused the problem, who had to apologize. I remember perfectly the first time he laid hands on me. We had ended the relationship after a strong fight, and I had spent the weekend at some friend's house, trying to distract myself and forget about him. The following Monday, I decided to go to his house to pick up some of my things that I had left there. When I arrived, Mark had prepared a romantic dinner. He had lit candles, soft music. He had cooked my favorite food. "Come, sit with me," he said with that sweet voice he knew how to use when he wanted to manipulate me. "Dine with me, please. I did all this for you." I told him that I hadn't come to dinner, that I just wanted to pick up my things and leave. But he insisted so much that in the end I agreed. We had dinner together, talked, and somehow he managed to convince me to stay that night. We even made love, as if we were the most in love couple in the world. But the next morning was completely different. As soon as dawn broke, Mark woke up with a completely cold and hostile attitude. He treated me as if I were a stranger, without affection, without respect. An argument started over something silly, and in the heat of the fight, unable to contain myself, I said, "I don't understand. Your attitude. I just spent a wonderful weekend with my friends. I even met a charming person. And now you come and treat me like this." The moment I mentioned that I had been with another person, Mark completely lost control. He approached me and gave me the first slap of my life. It was so strong that it left a mark on my cheek and my ears began to ring. I stood there, in total shock, unable to believe what had just happened. Immediately, I took my things and left his house. Mark did not try to stop me or apologize at that moment. He simply let me go, as if he didn't care. But 2 days later, he appeared at my house crying, begging me to forgive him. "Sarah, please forgive me," he said through tears. "I don't know what happened to me. You don't deserve that. I'm not like that. You make me behave strangely. It's just that I love you so much that I lose my mind when I think you might be with someone else. It won't happen again. I promise you." And I, like a fool, forgave him. I thought he really regretted it, that it had been a moment of madness that would not be repeated. How wrong I was. That was the first of many times Mark would lay hands on me. And each time he would become more violent, more controlling, more dangerous. The episodes of violence became more frequent and more intense. At first, it was just slaps when Mark got angry. But then he started pushing me, shaking me, squeezing my arm so hard that he left bruises. I always invented excuses to hide the marks. I fell down the stairs. I hit myself with the door. I hurt myself exercising. Anything so that no one would realize what was really happening. My friends began to notice changes in my behavior. I was no longer the cheerful and spontaneous Sarah from before. I had become more reserved, more nervous, always careful not to do anything that might bother Mark. Little by little, I lost all my friends because they got tired of seeing me in that situation and of me not listening to them when they tried to help me. "Sarah, that man is hurting you," they would say. "Open your eyes, please. This is not love. This is abuse." But I didn't want to listen. I always found a way to justify Mark's behavior, to blame myself for provoking him. The truth is that Mark had managed to completely isolate me. He had managed to make my world revolve solely around him. I lived to please him, to prevent him from getting angry, to maintain peace in the relationship. I had lost my identity, my self-esteem, my independence. I had become a shadow of what I was before. There was a particularly violent episode that happened in my own house, while my mother and my children were in the living room. Mark and I were in my room arguing about one of his infidelities, because he constantly cheated on me but then blamed me for not trusting him. The discussion became so intense that Mark, in a fit of fury, flipped my entire bed with his own hands. I fell to the floor. The dishes we had used for dinner fell. Everything broke. The noise was so loud that it woke up the whole house. But the worst was not that. The worst was when Mark ripped a wooden board from my bedroom door and hit me on the head with it. The blow was so strong that it opened a deep wound on my scalp, and I began to bleed profusely. Blood ran down my face, soaked my clothes, dripped onto the floor. At that moment, my mother knocked on the door worriedly. "Sarah, what's going on in there? Can you make less noise, please?" My mother had no idea that Mark was hitting me. She thought we were just making a lot of noise. And I, with my head bleeding, yelled, "Yes, Mom, we've stopped. Everything's fine." Meanwhile, Mark had fallen to the floor, pretending to cry uncontrollably. "My God, what have I done?" he yelled theatrically. "Sarah, forgive me. I don't deserve to live. I should be in jail for what I did to you." He hit his head with his hands, pulled his hair, put on a whole dramatic show. And the most incredible thing of all is that I ended up comforting him. With my head open and bleeding, I hugged him and told him not to worry, that everything would be fine, that I forgave him. Now, after so many years, I can't believe I was so blind, so foolish. The next day, I invented another excuse to explain the wound on my head. My family never knew the truth. Nobody knew what I was going through because Mark had managed to keep everything a secret. He had managed to make me an accomplice of my own abuse. Another episode I will never forget happened one night when we were at his house. My younger brother had come to visit me, and Mark became extremely jealous. As if my own brother was a threat to him, a terrible argument began, and I tried to leave the house to calm things down. But Mark wouldn't let me leave. He was preventing me from leaving the house, yelling at me, threatening me. I remember being at the door trying to convince him to let me go because it was very late and the neighborhood was dangerous at night. But he was completely out of control. The next thing I remember is waking up in my bed with my brother holding me. "What happened?" I asked, confused. "Where's Mark?" "You fainted," my brother told me. But there was something strange in the way he said it. "Mark is in the living room." The next day, when Mark left, my brother confronted me directly. "Sarah, tell me the truth. Does that man hit you?" "Why do you ask me that?" I said, trying to evade the question. "Because the way you were lying on the floor was not a natural faint. Someone hit you and knocked you unconscious. I saw the marks on your neck. That man is hurting you, isn't he?" I couldn't deny it anymore. I told him some of the things that had happened, although I didn't tell him everything, because I was very ashamed. My brother became furious and told me that he didn't want to see Mark in the house again. "If I see him here again, I'm going to break his face," he warned me. "And you, sister, you need to get away from that man before he kills you." But despite my brother's warnings, I kept going back to Mark. It was like an addiction. He always managed to convince me that things were going to change, that he loved me more than anything in the world, that he couldn't live without me. Mark had a very particular way of manipulating me. After each violent episode, he became the sweetest and most loving man in the world. He brought me flowers, wrote me love, letters, bought me gifts, told me the most beautiful words I had ever heard. He made me feel like the most loved woman on the planet. "You are my life, Sarah," he would tell me. "Without you, I am nothing. Forgive me for being so jealous, but I love you so much that I can't bear the thought of losing you. I promise to change. I promise to be the man you deserve." And I believed him. Every time I believed him. I thought he had finally understood, that this time he was really going to change. But the cycle always repeated itself. Violence, regret, reconciliation, honeymoon, and then violence again. But each time worse. There was a particularly terrifying incident that happened when we went out with a group of friends. Mark had too much to drink and became extremely jealous because I had spoken to an acquaintance we met at the venue. When it was time to leave, Mark was so furious that he completely lost control. He got in the car and started driving at a crazy speed. The friends who were with us yelled at him to slow down, that he was going to kill us all. I was terrified, holding onto the seat, begging him to stop. In the midst of that madness, Mark raised his arm and hit me with his elbow full in the face while driving. The blow was so strong that it left me half dazed. The friends in the back started yelling at him to stop, that he was crazy. When we finally reached our destination, one of my friends said to me, "Sarah, you're coming home with me tonight. I'm not leaving you alone with him." But Mark wouldn't let us leave so easily. Every time we called a taxi, he would appear and yell at the driver to leave. He would drive around the block in his car and come back to chase away the taxi driver. This happened several times until my friend got so scared that she decided to leave alone. "I can't do any more for you," she said, crying. "But please, take care. That man is crazy." I was left alone with Mark that night. He took all my things and threw them on the ground, then drove the car over them, destroying my phone, my makeup, my clothes, everything I had. Then he got out of the car and forced me to pick up the pieces of my destroyed belongings. "Look what you made me do," he said with that cold voice I knew so well. "This is what happens when you don't obey me." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake all night, thinking about how I had gotten into that situation, how I had allowed my life to turn into a nightmare. But even then, I didn't have the courage to leave him definitively. Mark had a devilish ability to make me feel that I was responsible for his violent behavior. "You make me angry," he would say. "You know exactly what to do to drive me crazy. If you weren't so jealous, so distrustful, I wouldn't react like that." Throughout that time, Mark was taking medication to control his anxiety and mood swings. He also took steroids to increase his muscle mass, which made his violent episodes even more intense and terrifying. He was a very strong man physically, and when he lost control, I had no chance of defending myself. There came a time when the situation had become so unsustainable that I decided to definitively end the relationship. I told Mark that I couldn't go on like this. that I needed to be alone, that our relationship had no future. At first, he didn't want to accept it. He begged me, threatened me, tried to emotionally blackmail me. But I stood firm in my decision. For several weeks we were separated, and I began to feel like the woman I was before I met him. I smiled again, went out with my friends, enjoyed life. I thought I had finally managed to get rid of him forever. But then Mark had a car accident. He crashed while driving at high speed and fractured several ribs. When he called me to ask me to take him to the hospital, all my compassion immediately returned. "Sarah, please help me," he said with a voice of pain. "I have no one else. My family abandoned me. I have no true friends. I only have you. Please don't leave me alone at this moment." And like the fool I was, I went to help him. I took him to the hospital, stayed with him during treatment, and when he asked me to take care of him at his house while he recovered, I accepted. "It will only be for a few days," I told myself, "just until he gets better." But those days turned into weeks. Mark took advantage of his condition to manipulate me once again. He was so sweet, so grateful, so affectionate. He made me feel indispensable, as if I were the only person in the world who truly loved and cared for him. During that time living together, we became intimate again. Mark convinced me that we had matured, that he had reflected during his recovery, and had understood how badly he had treated me. He promised me that things would be different this time. One Friday night, Mark told me he was going out with some barber friends to an entertainment venue he knew. "Go easy," I told him. "Enjoy with your friends." I took the opportunity to go home to arrange some papers for a trip my brother was going to make with my son. The following Monday, I returned to Mark's house as we had agreed. That night, we decided to go out to a bar we liked a lot. Everything seemed to be very good between us. We were laughing, singing, dancing, like in the old days, when we were happy. Around midnight, Mark noticed that the bar next door had more atmosphere and asked me if I wanted to go there. "Sure," I said without thinking twice. "If you want to go, let's go." But the moment I said those words, something changed in Mark's expression. He became tense, his gaze turned cold, and he began to argue with me about anything. The people at the bar noticed that we were having a fight, and some told me later that they had realized that Mark was very agitated. When I realized that the situation was getting out of control, I told him it was better to go home. Mark reluctantly agreed, and we called a taxi. During the ride, he was quiet, but I could feel the tension in the air. Upon arriving at his house, I took a picture of us and uploaded it to my social media. It was midnight and 26 minutes on November 15th, 1969. That photo, which was supposed to be a nice memory of our outing, would become the last image of myself before my life changed forever. We entered the house and Mark lay down on his mattress on the floor. I took his phone to check something, and that's when I saw the messages he had sent the previous Friday. Messages where he asked his friend to put his name and another woman's name on an event list. Mark had not gone out with his barber friends, as he had told me. He had gone out with another woman. "Mark," I said, showing him the phone, "why did you lie to me? Why didn't you tell me the truth about who you went out with on Friday?" He immediately became defensive, yelling at me, blaming me for checking his phone, telling me I was jealous and distrustful. The discussion quickly escalated, and I decided to leave the room to calm down. I went to the living room and lit a cigarette by the window. It was then that Mark got up and went to the kitchen. I saw him from behind next to the sink, and suddenly he turned towards me with a large knife in his hand. He pointed it directly at me and said with a voice I had never heard before, "I'm sick of you." "Mark, you're going crazy," I said, trying to keep calm. Put that away. Your parents live across the street. The neighbors can hear us. Don't do anything crazy." He stood there for a few seconds that seemed eternal, then turned around and put the large knife away. But what I didn't know was that he had taken another smaller knife and put it in his pocket. "Come here," he said with an apparently calmer voice. "Let's talk." I went back to the room thinking that maybe we could resolve things by talking. Mark was lying on his mattress on the floor and asked me to sit next to him. I sat at his hip level, facing him, ready to hear what he had to say. I don't remember exactly what words we exchanged, but I do remember perfectly the moment I felt the first impact. Mark had gotten up so quickly that I couldn't react, and he plunged the knife into my body. At that moment, my mind disconnected from reality. Everything began to happen in slow motion. I had always thought that death would be something quick, but I discovered that it is not. When you are facing death, you can see every detail with terrifying clarity. I fell to the floor face down, with my arms extended upwards, and Mark sat on my back as if it were a horse. With one hand, he pulled my hair, and with the other, he kept stabbing me again and again. There were 18 stab wounds in total, but at that moment, I couldn't count them. I only felt the piercing pain every time the knife penetrated my body. One of the stabs went through my esophagus, which damaged my vocal cords and prevented me from screaming. I couldn't ask for help. I couldn't make any noise. I could only lie there while Mark savagely attacked me. I saw my blood spilling on the floor, forming an increasingly large puddle. I could see every detail: the bright red color, the texture, the way it spread across the floor. My mind was completely conscious, but my body did not respond to me. In the midst of that agony, I began to think about death. What will it be like? I wondered. Will it be like sleeping? Will it hurt? Will I wake up somewhere else? But above all, I thought about God. I have to pray, I told myself. I have to ask God for forgiveness for all my sins. I began to pray, mentally, while Mark continued to attack me. I prayed with all the strength of my soul, entrusting myself to God, asking forgiveness for all the bad things I had done in my life. And as I prayed, an inner voice told me, "It's not your time yet. You will survive." At one point, Mark stopped stabbing me and took a pillow. He put it over my head and began to press, trying to suffocate me. My face was buried in my own blood, unable to breathe, unable to move. It was then that I had the idea of pretending to be dead. I tried to reduce my breathing, to stay completely still. Mark stopped for a few seconds, waiting to see if I reacted. But my adrenaline was so high that I couldn't completely control my breathing. And when I started to breathe harder, he continued the attack. I don't know how much time passed, but finally, with the little voice I had left, I managed to speak to him. "Mark," I said with a threat of a voice, "look at me." "It's me, Sarah. What are you doing? Don't do this. You know I love you." Something in my voice made him stop. He stood still, listening to me. "You're right," I continued, though every word hurt. "I deserve this, but now I need you to take me to the hospital. I promise I'm going to say I was assaulted. I'm not going to say anything about you. You have your daughter. I have my children. We're not going to ruin our lives over this." Incredibly, Mark believed me. "Okay," he said. "You're right." But instead of taking me to the hospital, he let me go alone. I left the house exactly as I was, without a phone, without documents, without anything. Just with bloody clothes and all the open wounds. It was approximately 3 a.m. when I went out into the street looking for help. I thought someone would help me immediately, but I was terribly wrong. The first person I saw was a man walking down the street. I approached him, dragging my feet, with my hand pressing my neck where it was bleeding the most. And with the little voice I had left, I said, "Please, help me. Call the paramedics." The man looked me up and down, saw all the blood, and without saying a word turned around and ran away. He didn't help me. He just fled as if I were a ghost. I kept walking through the empty streets, trying to find someone to help me. Every step was agony, but I knew that if I stopped, I would die, right there. I saw some cars and tried to stop them by standing in the middle of the street, but the drivers dodged me and drove past. At one point, I saw a car approaching and thought, "This one will stop. This one will help me." But when the driver saw me all bloody, he sped up and left. Some even recorded me with their phones, as if I were a show for them. I remembered that there was a bus terminal nearby. The bus drivers will help me, I thought. They are used to helping people. So I walked there, using all the strength I had left. When I arrived at the terminal, it was about 5 in the morning, and there were many people waiting for the bus to go to work. I approached the people and, with my broken voice, asked for help. "Please, help me. Call an ambulance." But people's reaction was even more horrible than I expected. Some looked at me with disgust, others with fear. When I tried to get on the buses, the drivers closed the doors and left. Nobody wanted to help me. Nobody. It was at that moment when I felt that I was really going to die. The blood loss was so much that I began to feel very weak, as if I were falling asleep. I lay down on the floor next to the terminal gate and thought, "This is where I'm going to die, alone, abandoned by everyone." But just as I was losing consciousness, I heard a voice coming from the guardhouse. It was an older man who shouted at me, "My dear, hold on a little longer. I've already called the paramedics. They're coming for you." Those words gave me the strength I needed to keep fighting. I don't know how much time passed, but finally the paramedics arrived. When they saw me, they immediately started working to stabilize me. "Madam, I need you to tell me who did this to you," one of the paramedics told me as they attended to me. And I, with the little voice I had left, gave him all the information. It was Mark Davies. His phone number is this. He lives at this address. I wanted to make sure they caught him before he could hurt anyone else. "Don't worry," the paramedic told me. "Now focus on staying awake. We're gonna save you." They cut off all my clothes, gave me saline solution, gave me oxygen. Throughout the journey to the hospital, I was conscious, watching them work to keep me alive. It was like watching a movie, but knowing I was the protagonist. When we arrived at the hospital, they took me directly to surgery. It was then that they finally gave me anesthesia, and I lost consciousness. I woke up 4 days later, in the intensive care unit. I was still heavily affected by the anesthesia, and was seeing things that didn't exist, but I clearly remember my brother standing by my bed. "I just want to be sure," he said with tears in his eyes. "Who did this to you?" "It was Mark," I confirmed, although speaking hurt terribly. "It's okay, sister. Get well. We're gonna get him." What I didn't know was that during those 4 days I was in a coma. My family had been desperately looking for me. Since I didn't return home and wasn't answering the phone, they had reported me missing. My photos were all over social media. My brothers had gone to all the police stations. Everyone thought something terrible had happened to me. Mark, meanwhile, had been acting as if he knew nothing. When people asked him about me, he would say, "We had a fight, and she left in the early morning. You know how Sarah is, very stubborn. She left angry and hasn't wanted to answer the phone." He even went so far as to say he wanted to file a report for my disappearance. "Let's all go to the police," he would tell my brothers. "Let's look for her together," all to maintain his facade as a concerned boyfriend. But when the news came out on television that I had been found alive in the hospital, Mark immediately knew he was in trouble. He showed up at the hospital just as my brother had finished talking to me, and I had confirmed that he was the culprit. Mark arrived and patted my brother on the shoulder as if he were his friend. "How is Sarah?" he asked with all the calm in the world. My brother, who already knew the truth, froze. He couldn't believe Mark's nerve to show up there as if nothing had happened. But my brother is an intelligent man, and he controlled himself because he knew that if he reacted violently, Mark could escape. However, my uncle couldn't control himself as much. When Mark extended his hand to greet him, my uncle grabbed him by the neck and began to hit him. "Confess what you did to my niece!" he yelled. "Confess, you bastard!" And Mark, seeing himself cornered and beaten, finally confessed. "Yes, it was me," he shouted. "I stabbed her, but it was in self-defense. She attacked me first." The police who were at the hospital immediately arrested him. But what happened next was something that hurt me as much as the stabbings themselves. They released him that same night. The delegate in charge of the case decided that there was not enough evidence to keep him detained, even though Mark had confessed in front of witnesses. The news came out in all the media, and there was a terrible scandal. People were outraged, my family was desperate, and I was terrified knowing that Mark was free. During the following weeks, while I fought for my life in the hospital, Mark was on the street as if nothing had happened. My family had to stand guard at the hospital 24 hours a day because we were afraid that he would return to finish what he had started. But the media and social pressure was so great that they finally issued an arrest warrant. Mark surrendered to the authorities because it was safer for him to be in jail than on the street, where neighbors and acquaintances wanted to lynch him. My recovery was very long and painful. I was in the hospital for 43 days. In addition to the stab wounds, I developed an infection that affected my lungs and kidneys. For a while they thought I was going to need dialysis for life, but thanks to God, my kidneys recovered. The most difficult thing was not the physical recovery, but the emotional one. The hospital psychologists could not understand how I could be so calm after having gone through something so traumatic. They expected me to be depressed, full of fear, with constant nightmares. But I felt strangely at peace. "How do you feel?" the psychologist asked me. "Are you sure you're okay? We have medications that can help you with anxiety and depression." "I don't need medication," I replied. "I feel good. I know it sounds strange, but I feel that God saved me for some reason." The truth is that from the moment I woke up from the coma, I felt an inner peace that I had never experienced before. It was as if I had died and had been reborn as a completely new person. I was no longer afraid. I no longer felt resentment towards Mark. I only felt immense gratitude for being alive. When I left the hospital, my ex-husband David welcomed me with open arms. "Sarah," he said, "I've come to take care of you. You don't have to worry about anything. Just focus on recovering." It was beautiful to have David back in my life. He never judged me for what had happened, never asked me why I had allowed Mark to abuse me. He simply loved me and cared for me as if I were the most precious thing in the world. Over time, David and I fell in love again. We got married again and built a beautiful family. We had more children together, saw our grandchildren grow up, lived many years of genuine happiness. David showed me what true love was. Respect, affection, protection, never violence. But my true transformation began a few years after the attack. I began to feel a very strong need to help other women who were going through similar situations to mine. I started to get involved in organizations that worked with victims of domestic violence. At first, I only told my story in small meetings, but little by little I gained confidence to speak in public. My testimony had a very strong impact on the women who listened to me. Many told me, "If you could survive 18 stab wounds, I can survive my problems." It was then that I discovered my true vocation: spirituality and service to others. I began to study religious texts, to meditate, to seek a deeper connection with God. I realized that my near-death experience had been a gift, an opportunity to understand the true purpose of life. During the following years, I became a spiritual counselor. Women came to me when they were in crisis, when they didn't know how to get out of abusive relationships, when they felt lost and hopeless. I listened to them, advised them, accompanied them in their healing process. "Sarah," they would say, "how did you manage to forgive Mark? How did you manage not to be filled with hatred and resentment?" And I always answered the same thing: forgiveness is not for him, it's for me. Carrying hatred is like taking poison, hoping the other person dies. I chose to heal. I chose to be happy. I chose to live in peace. It was not easy to reach that forgiveness. It took years of inner work, prayer, reflection. But when I could finally, completely forgive Mark, I felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. I was no longer someone who had suffered. I was someone who had triumphed. Mark was sentenced to 20 years in prison for attempted femicide. During his time in prison, he never tried to contact me. He never asked for forgiveness, never showed genuine repentance. As far as I knew from third parties, he continued to blame me for what had happened, saying that he had acted in self-defense. When he got out of prison several years ago, people asked me if I was afraid he would come looking for me. But I was no longer the same woman as before. I was no longer afraid of Mark or anyone. I had found my inner strength, my connection with the divine, my purpose in life. I dedicated 30 years of my life to helping women, victims of violence. I founded a support center where we offered psychological therapy, legal advice, temporary shelter, and above all, spiritual accompaniment. Thousands of women passed through our center, and many of them managed to completely rebuild their lives. The most difficult job was to convince women that they deserved true love, that violence is never normal, that there is a better life waiting for them on the other side of fear. Many arrived so broken, so convinced that they were worth nothing, that it took months just for them to believe they deserved to be treated with respect. I thought he hit me because he loved me very much, some told me. I thought jealousy was a sign of love. Love never hurts, I always replied. Love never harms, never humiliates, never destroys. What you lived was not love. It was possession. It was control. It was sickness. I especially remember a young woman who came to our center with her 6-month-old baby. Her husband had beaten her so badly that her face was completely disfigured. She was convinced that she could not live without him, that she had nowhere to go, that no one else would love her. "Miss Sarah," she would tell me, crying, "you don't understand. I love him. I know he hurts me, but he can also be very sweet. And besides, who is going to want me with a baby, and all beaten up like I am?" I took her hands and said, "My dear, look at me closely. I am 77 years old, and I am still loved. I survived 18 stab wounds and found happiness. If I could do it, you can too. But first you have to love yourself. You have to believe that you deserve something better." That young woman stayed in our shelter for 6 months. We gave her therapy, helped her find a job, supported her to finish her studies. Today, 15 years later, she is a successful nurse, married to a wonderful man who adores her son as if he were his own, and has 2 more children. Every year she sends me a photo of her family at Christmas. These success stories were what gave me strength to continue. Every woman who managed to break free from the cycle of violence, every child who grew up in a home free of abuse, every family that healed was a victory against darkness. I also worked a lot with the children of abused women. These children often grew up thinking that violence was normal, that this was how all families functioned. Boys especially ran the risk of becoming abusers when they grew up, because it was the only thing they had seen at home. Hitting is not normal, I would tell them in my workshops. A father who loves his family does not hurt the mother. A real man protects his family. He does not attack it. Some of these children wrote to me years later to tell me how they had broken the cycle of violence in their own families. "Ms. Sarah," one told me in a letter, "thanks to you, I understood that I could be a different husband and father. My wife has never received a blow from me, and my children grow up in a home full of love and respect. Over the years, my work extended beyond victims of domestic violence. I began to work with people who had suffered all kinds of traumas, accidents, illnesses, family losses, addictions. My experience of having been so close to death had given me a special perspective on human suffering and the capacity for healing. Pain is inevitable, I always told them, but suffering is optional. We are all going to face difficult moments in life, but we have the options of deciding how we are going to respond to those difficulties. My working method was always very simple. Listen with the heart, accompany without judging, and share hope. There were no magic formulas or quick solutions. There was only love, patience, and faith in the human capacity to heal and transform. At 62 years old, I decided to officially retire from social work, but I never stopped receiving people in my house. My living room became a refuge for wounded souls. They arrived at any time, often without warning, and I always received them with a hot coffee and a smile. David, my dear husband, never complained that our house was always full of people seeking help. On the contrary, he also got involved in the work, especially talking to men who wanted to change their violent patterns. "David," some would tell him, "how do you manage to never hit Sarah? Don't you get angry when she contradicts you or when she doesn't obey you?" "A real man doesn't need to hit to feel respected," David replied. "A real man earns respect with love, with work, with example. Only cowards hit women." David and I were happy for 40 years after our reconciliation. He died 5 years ago, at 84 years old, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Until the last day, he treated me like a queen, like the love of his life. He showed me that true love does exist, that it is possible to have a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection. When David died, many people thought that I was going to get depressed, that I was going to feel lost without him. But although I obviously felt a lot of sadness at his passing, I also felt immense gratitude for having had the opportunity to love him and be loved by him for so many years. "Ms. Sarah," my grandchildren told me at the funeral, "how are you going to do now without Grandpa David?" "My loves," I replied, "Grandpa David taught me so much about love that his love will live in my heart forever. I am not alone. I will never be alone because I carry with me all the love we shared." Now, at 77 years old, I live alone, but I never feel alone. My children visit me constantly. My grandchildren fill the house with laughter. My great-grandchildren bring me flowers from the garden. My house is always full of life, of love, of hope. I still receive women who need help. I can no longer work as intensely as before, but I always have time to listen, to advise, to share my experience. My story has become a light of hope for many people who are going through dark times. Ms. Sarah, a young woman who had arrived, beaten at my door recently, told me, "Do you really think I can be happy someday? Do you really think I can find a love like the one you had with David?" "My dear," I said, taking her hands, "not only do I believe you can be happy, I am sure you will be happy. But first you have to heal. You have to learn to love yourself. You have to understand that you deserve the best in life." And it's true. After all I've seen, after all the women I've accompanied in their healing process, I can say with certainty that there is always hope. It is always possible to start over. It is always possible to find happiness after pain. My experience with Mark, however terrible it was, became the starting point for a life full of purpose and meaning. If he hadn't attacked me, perhaps I would never have discovered my vocation for service. Perhaps I would never have helped so many women. Perhaps I would never have developed the spiritual strength that has sustained me throughout all these years. I'm not saying I'm grateful for what happened to me. The pain was real, the trauma was real. The scars on my body are still real. But I can say that I learned to transform that pain into something useful, something beautiful, something that could serve to heal others. This is the great lesson I have learned in my 77 years of life. We cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to what happens to us. We can choose to remain victims forever, or we can choose to become survivors, warriors, sources of inspiration for others. Every morning when I wake up, I thank God for giving me another day of life. I thank Him for my children, for my grandchildren, for my house, for my health, for the opportunity to continue being useful. I even thank Him for the scars on my body, because they remind me how strong I am, how far I've come, how much I've grown. To the women who are listening to my story, and who may be living similar situations, I want to tell you this: you are not alone. There is a way out. There is hope. There is life after abuse. But you have to make the decision to save yourselves. You have to take the first step. You have to ask for help. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait for the abuse to become deadly. Don't think that you will be able to change your abuser with love and patience. Abusers don't change because their victims love them more. They change when they decide to seek professional help, and that only happens when they face real consequences for their actions. To the men who abuse their partners, I also have something to say. You are not sick. You make choices. You choose violence because you think it is effective, because you have learned that you can control through fear. But you can also choose respect. You can choose true love. You can choose to be better people. Abuse is not genetic. It is not inevitable. It is not an incurable disease. It is a learned behavior that can be unlearned. But for that, you need to recognize that you have a problem. You need to take responsibility for your actions, and you need to seek professional help. To society in general, I want to tell you that we all have a responsibility in the fight against domestic violence. We cannot close our eyes. We cannot pretend that it is not our problem. When you see signs of abuse, when you hear screams, when you notice that a woman always has bruises, don't stay silent. That night when I went out bloody asking for help, many people saw me, and no one did anything. Some even recorded me as if it were a spectacle. That hurt me as much as the stabbings themselves. But fortunately, There was also that kind gentleman who called the paramedics and saved my life. We can all be that kind gentleman. We can all make a difference in someone's life who is suffering. We don't need to be heroes. We just need to be compassionate humans who care about the well-being of others. My story could have ended very differently. I could have died that November night in 1969. But God had other plans for me. He gave me a second chance, and I have tried to make the most of it. Now, in the twilight of my life, I can say that I have lived fully. I have loved and been loved. I have served my community. I have raised wonderful children who, in turn, have raised wonderful grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I have found inner peace, wisdom, serenity. When my time comes to leave this world, I will leave in peace knowing that my life had meaning, that my suffering was not in vain, that I was able to turn my pain into healing for others. I will leave knowing that I left the world a little better than I found it. This is my story, the story of Sarah Miller, a woman who survived the most extreme violence and found in that terrible experience the seed of an extraordinary life. A woman who learned that true love heals all wounds, that forgiveness frees the soul, and that there are always reasons to have hope. If my story can save just one life, if it can give hope to a single woman who is suffering, if it can inspire a single person to be better, then everything will have been worth it. Because at the end of the day, that's what life is about. Loving each other, taking care of each other, being a light in the darkness for those who need it most. May God bless all women who fight every day for their freedom, for their dignity, for their right to live in peace. May they find the strength to get out of where they are. May they find the people who will help them. May they find the hope that sustains them. And may one day, like me, they be able to look back and see how their pain was transformed into purpose, how their suffering became wisdom, how their experience became healing for others. This is my story, and I hope with all my heart that it serves to illuminate the path of other women towards freedom, towards healing, towards the happiness we all deserve.